Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're tackling an idea that honestly feels a bit backwards at first glance. It's about how sometimes, for a species, loneliness can be more dangerous than overcrowding.
That's right. We're diving into a really key paper from 1999 by Courchamp, Clutton-Brock, and Grenfell called Inverse Density Dependence and the Allee Effect.
And it's a timely one for its publication date, too, wasn't it? Exactly 50 years after W.C. Allee's big 1949 book on animal ecology.
It was, and it's so important because it revisits this ecological paradox. We normally worry about populations getting too big, right? Competition, resources running out.
Yeah, the usual suspects. But Allee pointed out way back that undercrowding as well as overcrowding may be limiting. That's the core idea we're exploring.
Exactly. So the Allee effect, technically speaking, is when you see a positive link between how fast a population grows and its density, but only when that population is already small.
Okay, say that again. Positive link.
Yeah, positive. So as the population gets smaller and smaller, its growth rate also gets smaller, or even goes negative. It's the opposite of what you'd intuitively expect based on resource competition alone.
Right. So instead of bouncing back when numbers are low because there's, more food per individual, they actually do worse.
Precisely. The per capita rate of increase drops as the population size shrinks, and this instability makes extinction suddenly much, much more likely. It's a kind of cliff edge.
A cliff edge. I like that. The authors called it an underappreciated dynamic process, and our mission today is to kind of unpack why this isn't just some obscure ecological footnote.
Absolutely. It has huge implications.
Okay, so let's get into the why. Why do small populations struggle like this? The paper breaks it down into, three main kinds of mechanisms?
Yeah, three main categories causing this inverse density dependence. The first is probably the most straightforward, genetic factors.
Yeah, the usual inbreeding problems.
Pretty much. When you've only got a few individuals left, you inevitably get inbreeding, loss of genetic diversity, heterozygosity specifically, and that directly leads to lower fitness, weakens the whole gene pool.
And they showed this in plants too, right? Like that Banksia example?
Yes, Banksia goody. A clear case where smaller populations just had lower fitness. It's pretty well documented.
Okay, so genetics is one. What's the second category? Sounds like it's more about just bad luck.
That's a good way to put it. It's demographic stochasticity, which is really just a fancy term for randomness, especially in things like birth rates, death rates, and crucially, the sex ratio.
Right. You could have, say, 50 animals left, which maybe sounds like enough to recover.
But if, just by chance, 45 of them are male, well, you're in deep trouble, aren't you? At very small numbers, these random fluctuations aren't just noise anymore. They can dictate the outcome.
The kakapo parrot example they mentioned is just brutal, isn't it?
Oh, it's a perfect, devastating illustration. The flightless parrot, Strigaps abruptilis, in 97, there were 54 birds total.
Okay, precarious.
But wait, only 20 were female. And even fewer of those were actually fertile.
Wow.
And then, even with the breeding program, one year they got 9 chicks, but only 2 were female. Just pure chance working against them, making it incredibly hard to find mates and rebuild numbers.
So genetics, random chance. And the third one seems to be about social life, or the lack of it.
Exactly. This is the one that's probably got the most research attention. Reduced cooperative interactions, or what ecologists often just call facilitation.
Facilitation, meaning how organisms help each other out just by being around.
In the broadest sense, yes. And the most commonly cited problem here is the simple mating shortage. If density drops too low, the chances of a lonely individual actually finding a receptive mate plummets.
And that obviously lowers the birth rate,
Which lowers the density further for the next generation, making it even harder to find mates.
creating that extinction vortex you hear about, like with that Glanville fritillary butterfly example.
Precisely. But facilitation isn't just about finding mates. It's also about survival, about protection. Think about reduced survival and protection.
How so?
Well, think of a big school of fish or a herd of wildebeest. There's safety in numbers, right? Early warnings, confusing predators.
The many eyes effect, or just overwhelming the predator's senses.
Exactly. Those anti-predator strategies just don't work very well when the group gets too small. The paper mentions sea urchin larvae sheltering under adult spines, sentinel systems in meerkats. All these things rely on density.
So being alone makes you vulnerable.
Very much so. And it gets even more acute for species that have to live in groups, those with what the paper calls a cooperative obligation.
Like the meerkats or surrogates they mentioned.
Yes. For species like circuits, they might suffer a strong Allee effect, even when their population isn't critically low overall, maybe even near carrying capacity in some senses.
Why is that?
Because successful breeding and raising young relies on having enough helpers. For surrogates, if the group size drops, there aren't enough individuals to share the load of, say, babysitting or standing guard while others forage. Juvenile mortality shoots up.
So they need a critical group size, not just a population size.
Exactly. A specific social structure is required. A small drop in numbers can trigger the Allee effect quite dramatically for them.
Okay, we've got the causes laid out. But you mentioned earlier work like the flower beetle study. That sounds like classic lab evidence.
It is. The work on Tribolium confusum, the flower beetle, is detailed in Box 1. It's one of the really early, clear demonstrations of Allee's principle in a controlled setting.
And what was the key finding there? The Tribolium paradox.
The paradox was that the beetle population grew fastest, not at the lowest density, nor at the highest, but somewhere in the middle.
Huh, why?
Showed these two opposing forces. At high density, the adult beetles cannibalize their own eggs' oophagy. That slows growth.
Okay, that makes sense. Overcrowding effect.
But at very low density, the females actually laid fewer eggs, and those eggs were less fertile. It turns out they need the stimulation of mating multiple times, which just doesn't happen as often when potential mates are scarce.
So, bad at high density, bad at low density, optimal in the middle. That really defines the Allee effect visually, doesn't it?
It does. And the major sort of theoretical consequence of all this is the existence of a critical threshold density, often called K- or K.
K-, the point of no return.
That's the idea. If the population density drops below this K, the internal dynamics flip and extinction becomes the most likely outcome, almost regardless of available resources. The growth rate just can't recover.
And this is where standard ecological models can fail us.
Big time. Many classic models assume growth rate just keeps increasing as density goes down, maybe leveling off. They assume negative density dependence across the board. They completely miss this unstable cliff edge at low densities and can therefore make populations seem much safer than they really are. They overestimate persistence times.
Okay, so this effect happens within a species, intraspecific. But the paper stresses it messes with relationships between species too, interspecific dynamics.
Yes, that's a crucial layer. Think about predators and prey, smaller prey groups. They're easier targets, more vulnerable.
Right.
But it affects the predators too, especially cooperative hunters like African wild dogs. They need a minimum pack size to hunt efficiently, bring down large prey, and crucially, defend their kills from scavengers like hyenas.
Ah, kleptoparasitism, someone stealing your lunch.
Exactly. If the wild dog pack gets too small, they might still be able to hunt, but they lose so much food to hyenas that it's just not energetically viable. Their whole system collapses.
And there's even an analogy with diseases.
Yeah, it's an interesting parallel. Things like measles in humans or that Fofenzine distemper virus in seals, they need a minimum number of hosts, a critical community size, to persist. Below that threshold, the disease dies out locally. It's not strictly an Allee effect, but it's the same kind of threshold dynamic.
So, knowing all this, how does it change how we manage wildlife or fisheries? The stakes seem really high.
They are. Species showing a strong Allee effect are incredibly sensitive. Even a small increase in mortality, maybe from harvesting or habitat loss, can push them over that K threshold into a sudden catastrophic collapse.
And fisheries are a prime example.
Absolutely. Many scientists believe this K threshold is a key reason behind some of the sudden, seemingly irreversible collapses of major global fisheries. Think about schooling fish like cod or herring. Their main defense is the school itself.
So heavy fishing reduces the density.
It reduces the density, weakens the school's defensive power, makes them more vulnerable to natural predators, maybe even reduces spawning success because mates are harder to find in the vast ocean. And suddenly they're below K and the population just crashes, even if fishing pressure is reduced later.
Given how important this sounds, why did the authors find it was barely mentioned in conservation textbooks back in '99? Only 5 out of 35.
That's a great question. I think part of it is, frankly, it's just really hard to study and quantify in the wild, especially for small, mobile, elusive populations.
Makes sense.
So it often gets overlooked in conservation planning, particularly in things like reintroduction programs. You might release animals, but if you don't release enough of them close enough together, they might fail simply because of the Allee effect. They can't find each other, can't form social groups, can't get established.
You need a critical mass from the start.
You often do, yes.
Okay, but here's a twist I found fascinating. Biological control. We can actually use the Allee effect against pests.
Yes. This is the really clever applied side of it.
Mhm.
If you want to control or eradicate a pest, you can try to create an alley effect artificially.
How?
The classic example is the sterile insect technique. Think Mediterranean fruit flies, or medflies. You raise millions of male flies, sterilize them with radiation, and then release them into the wild population.
Flooding the area with sterile males.
Exactly. So the wild fertile females waste their reproductive effort mating with these sterile males. The effective mating rate plummets, especially when the pest population is already low. You're essentially inducing a mating shortage alley effect to drive them towards local extinction.
Weaponizing loneliness, like you said. That's clever. But it cuts both ways, right? If you're introducing a good insect for biocontrol.
Absolutely. If you're releasing beneficial predators or parasitoids to control a pest, you have to release enough of them. If you release too few, they might suffer an alley effect, fail to find mates, fail to establish a sustainable population, and your whole biocontrol effort fails. It's the same principle, just working against you that time.
So looking forward, studying this is tough. You can't ethically shrink populations just to see what happens.
No, definitely not. We often have to rely on natural experiments observing populations after some disaster or disease outbreak or study them in controlled lab settings. The logistics and ethics are challenging.
What kind of research is needed most then?
The authors suggest, and I agree, that more theoretical work is really needed, especially on how alley effects ripple through multiple species interactions. We need better models that incorporate these nonlinear dynamics at low densities.
But it's not all theoretical challenges. There are practical implications for intervention, right?
Yes. If we know a species is prone to alley effects, we can potentially intervene before it hits K. Maybe actively manage density, not just numbers.
Like planting trees closer together for a rare plant,
Oh.
or temporarily managing social groups for animals.
Exactly. Maybe supplementing small groups of endangered social animals to get them above that critical threshold for cooperation just until they can sustain themselves. It opens up different management options.
Which really brings us back to that key recommendation from the paper. We need to consider density, not just total population size, as a criterion for endangerment.
That's the crucial shift in thinking. For many species, especially social ones or those relying on group defense or mass spawning, how densely packed they are is just as critical, maybe more critical, than the total count across their entire range.
It really reinforces Allee's original point from way back in 1931, doesn't it? That the social fabric, the density, the positive interactions are fundamental.
They are. If a species loses the ability to cooperate effectively, whether it's finding mates, raising young, or defending against predators simply because there aren't enough neighbors around, then its persistence is seriously jeopardized.
So here's a final thought to leave our listeners with. When we see species declining, sometimes mysteriously, like some of those amphibian declines, could it be an Allee effect that we're just not seeing, an underlying threshold crossed, making a recovery incredibly difficult, even if the original threat is gone?
It's a very real possibility. How often is this undercrowding problem the hidden culprit? When a population just can't seem to bounce back, it forces us to look beyond just the numbers.